The moment Ilhan Omar called Dan Bongino a fascist bootlicker on live television, she made the kind of mistake criminals make when they think the cop across the interrogation table is stupid. And Dan Bongino spent 11 years as a federal agent learning exactly how to handle that mistake. She'd arrived at the CBS studios for Face the Nation, unfiltered, with the confidence of someone who'd survived multiple controversies, who'd weathered accusations that would have ended other political careers, who'd learned that crying Islamophobia could deflect almost any criticism. She'd prepared her talking points. She'd rehearsed her indignant face. She'd coordinated with her communications team on the perfect Twitter responses for whatever happened. Dan Bongino had prepared something different. As a former NYPD officer, former Secret Service agent who'd protected 3 presidents, and current podcast host who'd built a media empire on fearless confrontation, he'd brought what he always brought: receipts, documents, facts. The investigative discipline of someone who'd spent years dealing with people who thought they could lie their way out of anything. What happened in the next hour would make Omar wish she'd never agreed to this debate, and would become the most watched political destruction in cable news history. If you've ever wondered what happens when someone who investigated threats to the president meets someone who some Americans believe is a threat to America, you're about to find out. And I promise you, what Bongino pulls out in round 3 will make you understand why Omar's handlers tried to cancel this debate 3 times. The studio audience was packed. 200 people carefully balanced between conservatives, liberals, and independents, though the producers had struggled to fill the progressive section. Turns out, even Omar's supporters weren't eager to watch her face, someone who actually came prepared. CBS had promoted this for weeks as the Great American Debate: Immigration, Identity, and National Security. The promos showed dramatic lighting, intense close-ups, the promise of fireworks. The network knew it would be explosive. They had no idea how explosive. Backstage, the contrast between the 2 participants was stark. Omar's team consisted of 5 people: communications director, policy advisor, 2 assistants, and what appeared to be a crisis management specialist, which should have been a red flag. They were huddled around her, adjusting talking points, wargaming responses, preparing deflections. The mood was tense, defensive. Bongino sat alone in his green room, reviewing notes on his iPad. No entourage, no handlers, just him and his research. Years in the Secret Service had taught him that the best preparation was individual preparation. Know your facts. Anticipate the deflections. Stay calm. Let the evidence do the work. Margaret Brennan, the moderator, sat in her chair backstage, reviewing her notes and questioning every career decision that had led to this moment. She was a serious journalist who preferred policy discussions to personal confrontations. This debate had the potential to be either career-defining or career-ending, depending on how it went. The studio audience settled into their seats. Some wore mega hats. Security almost didn't let them in, but CBS's lawyers reminded everyone about viewership numbers. Some wore hijabs in solidarity with Omar. Most wore normal clothes and expressions of curiosity. What they were about to witness would become the most watched political confrontation in modern American history. Margaret Brennan walked onto the stage to moderate applause. She took her seat between 2 chairs positioned at angles designed for conversation, though everyone in the room knew this would be combat. The chairs were 6 feet apart, close enough to create tension, far enough to prevent physical confrontation. The lighting was dramatic. Each participant would be clearly visible. Every facial expression captured in high definition. Omar walked out first to mixed applause and some boos, quickly shushed by her supporters. She wore a burgundy hijab that matched her lipstick and a navy blazer cut to look professional but accessible. She'd chosen the outfit carefully with her communications team, strong but not aggressive, Muslim but not threatening, the picture of congressional composure. She smiled at supporters in the audience, gave a little wave that looked spontaneous but had been practiced, and settled into her chair with the ease of someone who'd done hundreds of media appearances. She adjusted her microphone, tested it with a quiet "hello," and looked at the camera with confidence. This was her element: media, performance, narrative control. Bongino walked out 30 seconds later, the producer's idea to build suspense, to applause that was noticeably louder, much louder actually, which seemed to surprise the producers and visibly irritated Omar. The ovation went on for nearly 15 seconds before he gestured for quiet. He wore a dark suit that looked expensive but not flashy, a white shirt, a red tie, and an American flag pin on his lapel that caught the studio lights. He had the coiled energy of someone who'd spent years ready to take a bullet for presidents, the watchfulness of someone who'd investigated terrorists, the confidence of someone who knew exactly what evidence he had and what he was about to do with it. He nodded to the audience, gave a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, and sat down. Immediately, he made eye contact with Omar, direct, unwavering, the look of an interrogator sizing up a suspect. She held his gaze for maybe 2 seconds before looking away, pretending to adjust her hijab. The audience caught it. The cameras caught it. First point, Bongino. The studio lights came up to full brightness. The cameras went live in living rooms across America. 14 million people were tuning in, far more than CBS had anticipated. The ratings would eventually hit 23 million as clips went viral and people rushed to watch the live stream. Margaret Brennan shuffled her notes one last time, took a breath, and began. Welcome to both of you. Tonight, we're here to discuss some of the most contentious issues in American politics. Immigration policy, national security, the role of identity in... Before we start, Omar interrupted, and Brennan's face twitched with irritation at being cut off in her own introduction. Omar was already pivoting to offense, deploying the strategy that had worked for her dozens of times before. I just want to say that I find it deeply problematic that CBS chose to platform someone like Dan Bongino, who has spent years spreading Islamophobic conspiracy theories and attacking Muslim members of Congress without any accountability. She was warming up now, her voice taking on that righteous indignation that played well with her base. People like him represent the fascist bootlicker wing of American politics, the people who would rather attack and delegitimize elected officials than engage in substantive policy discussions. This is exactly the kind of... She was mid-insult when Dan Bongino smiled. Not a polite smile, not a political smile, not the kind of smile you give when someone says something funny or charming. This was the smile of a federal agent who just watched a suspect incriminate themselves. The smile of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this opening. The smile of a trap snapping shut. "Thank you for that," he said, his New York accent thick and unapologetic, somehow making those 4 words sound both polite and menacing. "I really appreciate you establishing the tone so quickly. Now we can talk freely." The emphasis on freely made Omar's eyes narrow slightly. She'd intended to put him on the defensive. Instead, she'd just given him permission to take the gloves off. "Now we can talk freely." Margaret Brennan looked panicked. This had gone off script in the first 30 seconds. "Let's try to keep this civil," she began. "I am being civil," Bongino said, his tone reasonable, but his eyes locked on Omar. "The Congresswoman just called me a fascist bootlicker on national television. I think that establishes the ground rules pretty clearly." He leaned forward slightly, and something in the movement made the audience go quiet. This was the posture of someone who'd protected presidents, who'd seen threats, who knew how to identify danger. Before we get into name-calling, Congresswoman, let me ask you about something you said. March 23, 2019, KR event in Los Angeles. You were discussing the founding of CARE, and you said, I'm quoting directly from the transcript, CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Some people did something. That's how you describe the September 11th terrorist attacks. Some people did something. The audience was dead silent. Omar's face tightened. That quote was taken out of context, she started. I have the full video, Bongino interrupted. Would you like me to play it? Without waiting for an answer, he nodded to the control booth. The screen behind them came to life with footage from the CARE event. There was Omar speaking to the audience, and the quote was even worse in context, delivered with a dismissive shrug, as if 9/11 was some minor inconvenience, rather than the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. Bongino let it play. Let America watch. Then he spoke, and his voice had dropped to something quieter, more intense, more dangerous. I was a Secret Service agent on September 11, 2001. I was in New York, not far from Ground Zero. The audience was completely still now. Some people, 19, Al-Qaeda terrorists, carefully selected, carefully trained, carefully coordinated, did something. They murdered 3,000 Americans. They flew planes into buildings. They killed firefighters, police officers, office workers, passengers. They killed a friend of mine. His voice didn't rise, but the intensity increased. I pulled people out of buildings that day. I watched the towers fall. I went to funerals for months. Months. Burying people who went to work on a Tuesday morning and never came home. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and images appeared on the monitor behind them. FDNY funerals, the memorial at Ground Zero, names etched in bronze, thousands of names. And you called it? Some people did something. Omar tried to interrupt. I was making a point about civil liberties by minimizing mass murder. Bongino's voice rose, now controlled anger breaking through. By describing the worst terrorist attack in American history like it was a fender bender. Some people did something? He stood up, a dramatic move that made Margaret Brennan flinch. I've worked security for 3 presidents. I've investigated terrorist plots. I've protected this country for over a decade. I've put my life on the line for America more times than I can count. He pointed at her, and his voice was steel. And you're going to sit there and call me a fascist bootlicker while you can't even properly describe 9/11? While you minimize the murder of 3,000 Americans? The audience erupted. Applause, shouts, a few boos from Omar's supporters, but they were drowned out. Here's what I think, Congresswoman, Bongino said, sitting back down but never breaking eye contact. Someone who minimizes 9/11 doesn't get to lecture anyone about patriotism. Someone who calls it, some people did something, has no moral authority to call anyone else a fascist. He leaned back in his chair. You're in Congress because America gave you refuge. Your family came here as refugees from Somalia. America gave you safety, education, opportunity, everything. The least you could do is respect our murdered. The absolute least. The silence that followed was deafening. He was a federal agent on 9/11. She called it, some people did something. If that makes your blood boil, share this. Omar was reeling, but tried to recover with her usual deflection. This is typical Islamophobic attacks that I face constantly. Oh, good, Bongino interrupted, and there was something almost cheerful in his tone that should have warned her. Let's talk about phobias. Let's talk about your problem with Jews. You could see the realization cross her face. She'd walked into another trap. Margaret Brennan tried to regain control. Let's keep this civil and stick to policy. I am being civil, Bongino said, and I am discussing policy, foreign policy, specifically the Congresswoman's statements about Israel and Jewish Americans. He pulled out his phone again. He'd clearly come prepared with everything loaded and ready. February 10th, 2019. Congresswoman, you tweeted about support for Israel and you wrote, I'm quoting exactly, "It's all about the Benjamin's baby," with a musical note emoji. The tweet appeared on the screen behind them, preserved for posterity. For those who might not know, Bongino said, his tone taking on the quality of a prosecutor educating a jury, that's an anti-Semitic trope. The idea that Jews use money to control policy. It's old, it's vile. And it's exactly what the Congresswoman tweeted. Omar tried to speak. I was criticizing IPAC's influence with an anti-Semitic trope, Bongino said flatly. But that wasn't your first rodeo with this stuff, was it? He scrolled on his phone and another tweet appeared on screen. This one older, from 2012. Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. He looked up from his phone. Hypnotized the world. That's another anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. The idea that Jews have mystical power to control global opinion, this isn't new for you. The audience was murmuring now, some in agreement, some in discomfort, but all engaged. Let's keep going, Bongino said. You've compared Israel to Nazi Germany. You've supported the BDS movement, boycott, divest, sanction, which even many Democrats acknowledge is anti-Semitic. You've questioned the loyalty of American Jews who support Israel. He put down his phone and looked directly at her. The United States House of Representatives, your own colleagues from your own party, passed resolutions condemning your statements twice, not Republicans attacking you, your own party. Omar's face was flushed. Now, I have Jewish friends who— Stop, Bongino said, holding up a hand. I have Jewish friends is not a defense. Let me ask you something. If I tweeted, it's all about the welfare when discussing a social program you support, what would you call me? Silence. If I said, Somalia has hypnotized its diaspora, what would you call me? Still silence. You'd call me racist, and you'd be right. Because those would be racist statements using stereotypes to attack an entire group of people. He leaned forward. But when you do the same thing to Jews, you call it policy criticism. When people call you out, you call it Islamophobia. That's not criticism. That's anti-Semitism. And everyone knows it. Bongino's voice softened slightly, but it was somehow more cutting. You came to America as a refugee. You know what refugees were fleeing in the 1940s? The Holocaust. Jewish refugees fleeing genocide. They came here just like your family did. They built communities. They contributed. They became Americans. He paused. And you attack them using the same conspiracy theories that led to the Holocaust. The same Jews control everything with money in garbage that got 6 million Jews murdered. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. That's not Islamophobia, Congresswoman. That's accountability. The House condemned you twice for anti-Semitism, your own party. But you're still here, still attacking Jews, still playing victim when called out. He sat back. Maybe the problem isn't everyone being Islamophobic. Maybe the problem is you being anti-Semitic. The House condemned her twice for anti-Semitism, but she calls others fascists. Comment if you see the problem. Margaret Brennan was visibly struggling to control the debate, but the ratings had to be through the roof, so the producers were probably telling her to let it ride. Omar tried a different tactic, pivoting to victimhood. These attacks on Muslims in America. Let's talk about immigration, Bongino interrupted. Since you're such an advocate for open borders, and you lecture us constantly about compassion for immigrants. He reached under his chair and pulled out a folder. Not a thin folder, a thick one, the kind law enforcement uses for complex investigations with multiple documents, photos, timelines. Omar's eyes went to it like a suspect, eyeing evidence they thought was buried. You married Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi in 2009, correct? Bongino asked, opening the folder. My personal life is not relevant to, Omar began. You're a public official, Bongino cut her off. Who lectures us about immigration policy? Your immigration history is absolutely relevant. So yes or no? Did you marry Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi in 2009? Yes, but that's... And you were already married to Ahmed Hirsi at the time, your first husband. The audience gasped. This was getting into territory that mainstream media had largely avoided. That was a religious marriage, not legal, Omar said quickly. Let's walk through the timeline, Bongino said, pulling out documents. Because it's fascinating. He put on reading glasses, a deliberate move that made him look like a detective presenting evidence. 2002, you enter into a religious marriage with Ahmed Hirsi. You have 2 children with him. 2008, you separate from Hirsi. 2009, you legally marry Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. But here's where it gets interesting. He pulled out a document. Property records from 2011 to 2012. While legally married to Elmi, you're living with Hirsi. You're photographed with him at events. You have more children. Public records show you living at the same address. More documents came out of the folder. 2017, you filed for divorce from Elmi, but you can't locate him for the divorce proceedings. Your own lawyer said he hadn't seen him in years. Where'd he go, Congresswoman? Omar was gripping the arms of her chair. 2018, you legally marry Hirsi, finally making legal what had apparently been your actual relationship for years. 2019, you divorce Hirsi. 2020, you marry Tim Minette, your campaign consultant. We'll get to him later. Bongino set down the timeline and looked at her. Now, here's what multiple investigations by conservative media, by Minnesota state agencies, by campaign finance boards have alleged. Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi is your brother. The audience erupted. Margaret Brennan looked like she wanted to cut to commercial. That's a disgusting smear, Omar started. Then prove it wrong, Bongino said simply. Show us Elmi's birth certificate. Show us his immigration records. Take a DNA test. Prove these allegations are false. You can't, Bongino continued. Or won't, because here's the evidence that's been compiled. He pulled out photos, printed screenshots from social media and public records. Photos of you and Elmi as children in Somalia, school records listing the same parents, family members referring to him as your brother in posts before you deleted them, immigration documents with irregularities, a birth date that suspiciously matches your brother's birth date from other documents. He spread them out. The allegation is that you married your brother to commit immigration fraud, to get him into the country, or to get him status. And before you call this racist conspiracy theory, let me remind you, immigration fraud is a real crime that real people commit. I investigated it when I was in federal law enforcement. Omar looked at Margaret Brennan desperately. Are you going to let him— Answer the question, Bongino said. Is Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi your brother? Yes or no? That's been debunked. By whom? You haven't released any records. You've just denied it. If it's debunked, show us how. He pulled out another document. But, let's give you the benefit of the doubt on the brother allegation. Even without that, you've got problems. You filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi in 2014 and 2015 while legally married to Ahmed Elmi. He held up the document. That's tax fraud, not alleged. Documented. Minnesota Campaign Finance Board investigated you. You paid a fine. $3,400 for improperly using campaign funds and for tax violations. The fine documentation appeared on screen. You paid the fine, but never really explained it. Just paid it and moved on, hoping nobody would notice. Bongino stood up, his second time standing, signaling the importance of this moment. Let me tell you what I see. You came here as a refugee. America gave you everything. Safety, education, opportunity, a seat in Congress. And you potentially committed immigration fraud. The exact kind of fraud that undermines our refugee system and makes it harder for legitimate refugees. His voice was rising now. If these allegations are false, prove it. You have access to all the records, birth certificates, immigration documents, DNA tests. Prove me wrong. Prove the Minnesota investigators wrong. Prove the journalists wrong. He pointed at her. But you won't, because either the allegations are true or you think you're above having to prove anything to the American people. He sat back down, and his voice dropped to that dangerous quiet again. I spent years investigating people who gamed our immigration system, who lied on forms, who committed fraud to get into this country illegally or to bring people in illegally. We prosecuted them, we deported them, because laws matter. He looked at the camera. You want open borders. You want no enforcement. You want to abolish ICE. You want amnesty for everyone. But you won't answer basic questions about your own potential immigration fraud. That's not advocacy. That's hypocrisy. His final line was delivered directly to her. Release the records, Congresswoman. Prove me wrong. I dare you. She won't release the records. Ask yourself why. If you think she should prove these allegations wrong, share this. Omar was visibly shaken, but tried to pivot to safer ground. Can we please discuss actual policy issues? Great idea, Bongino said with false enthusiasm. Let's discuss your policy of using campaign funds like a personal ATM. He pulled out a new folder, this one labeled FEC Filings. Nothing scares a politician like an investigator who's actually read their financial disclosures. Your current husband, and I specify current because you've had a few, Tim Minot. He runs a consulting firm called the E Street Group. How much has your campaign paid his firm? Omar hesitated. Campaigns hire consultants all the time. How much? Bongino pressed. That information is public. $2.8 million, Bongino said. Your campaign has paid your husband's firm $2.8 million, almost $3 million. He let that sink in as shocked murmurs spread through the audience. Let's walk through this timeline, Bongino said, pulling out documents and arranging them. Because it tells a story. He began ticking off points. 2018, Tim Minot starts working as a consultant for your campaign. He's married to someone else at the time. So are you, to Ahmed Hirsi, your third marriage. 2019, his wife files for divorce, alleging that Minot told her he was having an affair with you. Your name is in the divorce filing. 2019. You told divorce Ahmed Hirsi, your third divorce. 2020. You marry Minette. How romantic. 2020 to 2024. His firm receives $2.8 million from your campaign. Bongino looked up from the documents. You're literally paying your husband millions of dollars with donor money. Money that people gave to your campaign thinking it would go toward, I don't know, actual campaign activities. He pulled out spreadsheets, FEC filings with highlighted sections. Travel expenses to his firm, $780,000, consulting fees, $1.2 million, media production, $650,000, fundraising, consulting, $420,000. He flipped through pages. Some of these consulting expenses are to cities where you just happen to be together. Hotels, meals, funny how that works. Omar tried to defend. The FEC reviewed. The FEC fined you, Bongino interrupted. Minnesota Campaign Finance Board fined you for using campaign funds for personal expenses, for improper tax filings, for violations that would get a regular person charged with fraud. He held up the fine documentation. $3,469 fine from Minnesota. But here's the thing about fines. You only get fined when you're guilty. You paid the fine, which is basically admitting you did it, but you never really explained what you did or why. Bongino leaned forward. Let me translate from politician speak to English. You used campaign donor money for personal expenses. You paid your boyfriend, now husband, millions of dollars. You violated campaign finance law. You got caught, you paid a fine, and you're still doing it. He pulled out more recent FEC filings. Even after the fine, your campaign is still funneling money to your husband's firm, $180,000 just in the last quarter, because apparently the rules don't apply to you. His voice took on a mocking tone. You run on getting money out of politics. You attack corporate influence. You rail against corruption. You call yourself a reformer. The mockery disappeared, replaced by cold anger. But you're literally enriching yourself and your family with campaign donations. You're using donor money as a family slush fund. That's not public service. That's self-service. That's fraud dressed up in progressive politics. He sat back. The FEC fine you paid? It was the largest for a House member at the time. Congratulations. You're not just a hypocrite. You're an overachieving hypocrite. His final line was delivered with contempt. You're not fighting corruption, Congresswoman. You are the corruption. You just dress it up in social justice language and hope nobody notices. Well, we noticed. $2.8 million to her husband's firm from your donations. If you're tired of swamp creatures calling themselves reformers, like and share. Margaret Brennan, sensing they were running long, but knowing the ratings were astronomical, decided to open it up to broader topics. Let's discuss foreign policy and national security. Perfect, Bongino said. Let's discuss the Congresswoman's unique perspective on terrorism. Omar's eyes narrowed. If you're going to accuse me of— I'm not accusing, Bongino said calmly. I'm quoting. Your words, your gestures, your pattern. He had that look again. The Secret Service agent who'd found the threat. 2019 interview about U.S. foreign policy. You were discussing your college experience, and you said, I'm reading your exact words. When I was in college, I took a terrorism class. Every time the professor said Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah, he sort of like added this very complicated, nuanced, but the way the professor framed it, this is when victims of Western imperialism decided to do something. Bongino looked up from his notes. But the best part wasn't what you said. It was how you said it. You made air quotes. When you said Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, you literally made air quotes with your fingers. Like, they're not real terrorists. Like, it's all just Western propaganda. He pulled out his phone and video played on the screen. Omar, in the interview, physically making air quotes as she dismissed terrorist organizations. The audience's reaction was visceral. Gasps, angry mutters, a few people shaking their heads in disbelief. Air quotes, Bongino repeated, for Al-Qaeda, the organization that killed nearly 3,000 Americans on 9/11. His voice was getting harder now, the former federal agent's disgust breaking through. Al-Qaeda killed my friend. They killed 343 firefighters. They killed office workers, first responders, passengers. And you use air quotes like there's some made-up boogeyman. He switched the image on screen to photos of Hezbollah attacks. Hezbollah killed 241 United States Marines in the Beirut barracks bombing. They've killed hundreds of Americans over decades. They're a designated terrorist organization by the U.S. government. And you use air quotes. Omar tried to interrupt. I was describing how the professor— No! Bongino cut her off. You weren't just describing. You were agreeing. You said terrorism is when victims of Western imperialism decided to do something. That's not describing someone else's view. That's stating your own. You think terrorism is justified? You think it's a response to Western imperialism? He stood up, third time, and the audience knew this was building to something. Let's talk about your trip to Somalia in 2022. You went back, big news. Congresswoman returns to her homeland. Photos appeared on screen. Omar in Somalia, addressing large crowds, being treated like a celebrity. You know what you didn't do while you were there? You didn't meet with victims of Al-Shabaab. You didn't visit communities terrorized by that Somali terrorist group. You didn't talk about the Americans they've killed, or the aid workers they've murdered. More photos. Omar at rallies. Omar with Somali officials. Omar being celebrated. Instead, you held political rallies. You talked about Somali nationalism. You were treated like a hero. And when you came back, you didn't say, I'm grateful to be an American. You said, and I'm quoting again, ask us what country we are from. Bongino walked closer to her chair. Not, I'm American, not, I'm proud to represent Minnesota. You said people should ask what country you're from, suggesting you're not American first, suggesting your identity is Somali, not American. He turned to address the audience. You're a sitting member of the United States Congress. You took an oath to defend the Constitution, but you identify as Somali first. You use air quotes for terrorists who kill Americans. You justify terrorism as victims of Western imperialism. He turned back to Omar. Here's what I see, what a lot of Americans see, a pattern. You minimized 9/11. Some people did something. You use air quotes for Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah. You compare the United States to Hamas and the Taliban. Yes, you did that in a CNN interview. You defend Qatar, a state sponsor of terrorism. And you never condemn Islamic terrorism without immediately adding, but America. His voice was rising now, passion and anger mixing. I protected presidents from terrorists. Real terrorists, not air quote terrorists. I've seen what they do. I've investigated their plots. I've watched them try to kill Americans. I've seen the aftermath of their attacks. He pointed at her. And you sit in Congress, in the People's House, and minimize them, defend them, excuse them, make air quotes like they're not real threats. His final question was delivered with intensity. Here's what Americans want to know. Whose side are you on? The silence was absolute. Because from where I sit, looking at your statements, your votes, your pattern, it's not America's side. She used air quotes for Al-Qaeda. She minimized 9/11. She questions American identity. Comment, whose side if you see the problem? Omar tried one last desperate defense, her voice shaking slightly. I love this country. I'm grateful for the opportunities. Dan Bongino laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a genuine, incredulous, you have got to be kidding me laugh. You love this country, he said, still smiling. But his eyes were hard. Really? Show me. Show me one time, just one, where you've defended America without immediately attacking it. Omar opened her mouth, then closed it, searching mentally. I'll wait, Bongino said, leaning back in his chair with exaggerated patience. One speech, one interview, one tweet, where you defend America, praise America, express gratitude for America without a but, or a however, or immediately pivoting to how terrible we are. The audience was silent, watching Omar struggle. There are many times when I've said, name one, Bongino pressed. Just one. She couldn't. The silence stretched on, painful and damning. Of course you can't, Bongino said, and the mockery was gone from his voice, now replaced by something colder. Because it doesn't exist. You've been in Congress for 6 years. You've done thousands of interviews. You've sent millions of tweets, and you can't name a single time you defended America without attacking it in the same breath. He pulled out his phone one more time, and a compilation appeared on the screen. A montage of Omar's quotes. America was founded on genocide. We must abolish ICE. America is not the moral leader. American imperialism. America and Hamas and the Taliban. Systemic oppression in America. America's history of racism. Quote after quote, clip after clip. All of Omar attacking, criticizing, condemning America. That's a random sample, Bongino said. I could show you hundreds more, thousands. Your entire political career is built on attacking America. He stood up for the fourth and final time. Let me tell you a story. You came here as a refugee when you were 12 years old, from Somalia, from a war zone, from a country torn apart by violence, where warlords controlled territories, where there was no functioning government, where people were dying of starvation and disease. His voice was quiet, but intense. America took you in, gave you safety, gave you food, shelter, education. You went to North Dakota State University. You got involved in politics. You became a state representative, then a congresswoman. The American dream, the thing that millions of people around the world dream about. He paused. Somalia has a GDP per capita of $447. America has a GDP per capita of 76,000. Somalia ranks 172nd out of 180 countries in corruption. America, for all our problems, has rule of law. Somalia has a life expectancy of 57 years. America is 78 years. He walked toward her. You escaped that. You came here. And America gave you opportunities you could never have had in Somalia. You'd never be a politician there. You'd never have the freedom to criticize the government. You'd never have the platform, the influence, the power you have here. His voice was rising again. And you spend every single day attacking the country that saved you. Every day, every speech, every interview. America is terrible. America is racist. America is imperialist. America is genocidal. America, 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 always the villain. He stopped directly in front of her chair. So, here's my question. and I want you to answer it honestly. If America is so terrible, why did you come here? Why did your family seek refuge here instead of Saudi Arabia, or Turkey, or any other Muslim country? Omar started to speak, but Bongino cut her off. And why do you stay? Somalia is free. You can go back. You can renounce your citizenship and return to the country you clearly prefer. But you don't. The question hung in the air like an accusation. I'll tell you why, Bongino said, answering his own question. Because America gave you opportunities you'd never have in Somalia. Because America has rule of law Somalia doesn't have. Because America let a refugee become a congresswoman, something that wouldn't happen anywhere else. Because America is actually the greatest nation on earth, and you know it. He walked back to his chair and sat down. But you can't admit it. You can't express gratitude. You can't say one positive thing about America without immediately tearing it down. Because your entire political brand is built on resentment, on grievance, on presenting yourself as a victim of the country that saved you. His final statement was delivered with quiet contempt. That's not representation. That's not leadership. That's not even honest. You don't love America. You resent it. You resent that you needed it. You resent that you benefit from it. And Americans are finally seeing through it. She attacks America daily, never defends it, never shows gratitude. Share if you think representatives should actually represent America. Margaret Brennan looked at her watch. They'd gone way over time, but this was television history. The producers were probably doing backflips in the control room. We are nearly out of time. Congresswoman Omar, would you like a final statement? Omar gathered herself, trying to summon whatever dignity remained. Tonight demonstrates the racism and Islamophobia that I and other Muslim members of Congress face daily. These personal attacks, these conspiracy theories, this harassment, it's designed to silence voices like mine that challenge. No, Bongino's voice cut through her statement like a knife. No, we're not ending with that. We're not letting you hide behind those words again. Margaret Brennan started to object. Mr. Bongino, the format— I don't care about the format, Bongino said, standing up and walking to center stage. This needs to be said. America needs to hear it. The audience was electrified. This wasn't in the script. This was real. You've hidden behind Islamophobia and racism for 6 years. Every time someone asks you a tough question, every time someone quotes your own words, every time someone demands accountability, you cry bigotry and everyone backs off. He walked closer to her. Not tonight. Tonight, it ends. He began to recite from memory, his voice taking on a ceremonial quality. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. He let the words hang in the air. That's the oath you took, January 3rd, 2019. Same oath I took when I became a Secret Service agent. Same oath every federal law enforcement officer takes. Same oath every military member takes. Same oath every member of Congress takes. He looked at her directly. Have you kept it? Before she could answer, he continued. You minimized the 9/11 attacks, the single biggest attack on America by foreign enemies in our history. That's not defending America against enemies. That's excusing them. He started counting on his fingers. You spread anti-Semitism, attacking Jewish Americans and Israel. That's not supporting the Constitution's guarantee of religious freedom. That's bigotry. You potentially committed immigration fraud to bring someone into this country illegally. That's not upholding the law. That's breaking it. You used campaign funds illegally, paid your husband millions, violated FEC regulations. That's not faithful public service. That's corruption. You minimized terrorism, used air quotes for Al-Qaeda, justified violence as response to Western imperialism. That's not defending America against enemies. That's sympathizing with them. You prioritize Somalia over America. Tell people to ask what country you're from. Show no gratitude for your refuge here. That's not true faith and allegiance. That's divided loyalty. You attack America every day while enjoying all its benefits: the salary, the platform, the freedom. That's not defending the Constitution. That's exploiting it. He stopped counting, his hand falling to his side. Every oath you took, you broke it. Not once, repeatedly, consistently, as a pattern of behavior. The silence in the studio was total. You could hear the cameras running. "So, here's what Americans want to know," Bongino said, and his voice was quiet again, dangerous again. "Are you an American who happens to be Somali? Or are you a Somali who happens to be in America?" He let the question sit. Do you defend the Constitution against enemies, or do you make excuses for them? Do you serve your constituents, or do you serve yourself? Do you love this country, or do you resent it? Omar tried to respond, her voice shaking. "I have always served." "No," Bongino cut her off. "You haven't. Tonight proved it. Every question, every fact, every piece of evidence. You deflected. You called it racism. You called it Islamophobia. You blamed everyone except yourself." He walked back to his chair and sat down, and somehow that was more powerful than standing. You can't defend your record because it's indefensible. You can't answer questions because the answers condemn you. You can't admit the truth because the truth is you've broken every promise you made. He looked directly at the camera. "I've protected presidents. I've investigated terrorists. I've served this nation for decades. In the NYPD, in the Secret Service, and now in media holding politicians accountable." He paused. "And I can say with absolute certainty, Ilhan Omar is in Congress, but she's not of America. She's here physically, but she's not here in spirit. She's not one of us. She doesn't share our values. She doesn't honor her oath. She doesn't love this country." Omar sat frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. "And Americans know it," Bongino continued. "They feel it. They see it. They've seen it in every statement, every vote, every controversy. Tonight just confirmed what they already knew." The audience began to stand. First a few people, then more, then most of the conservative half. They were applauding. For Bongino, against Omar. Margaret Brennan had completely lost control of the broadcast. The applause continued for nearly 30 seconds. When it finally died down, Bongino delivered his final line. "You took an oath to defend America. You've spent 6 years attacking it. The oath you took, you broke it. And Americans see exactly who you are." Omar sat in her chair, her face a mask of stunned defeat. She couldn't cry Islamophobia. Bongino had used her own words. She couldn't cry racism. He'd cited facts and public records. She couldn't deflect. He'd answered every deflection with more evidence. She had nothing left. The cameras captured everything. Her face, her silence, her defeat. It was over. The clip hit social media before the debate even ended. Someone in the audience was live streaming. By the time Bongino and Omar left the studio through different exits, Omar's security hustled her out a side door while Bongino walked out the front to cheers. The video had 5 million views. By midnight, 30 million. By 48 hours, 94 million views across all platforms. "Whose side are you on?" became an instant rallying cry. Within hours, it was on T-shirts, bumper stickers, protest signs. It became the question conservatives asked about every controversial politician. The oath you broke trended for 5 straight days. It spawned 1,000 memes. Omar's face from the debate frozen in that moment of defeat, captioned with various versions of "when the receipts arrive." The mainstream media tried to control the narrative. CNN ran with Islamophobic attack on Muslim Congresswoman. MSNBC had segments about dangerous rhetoric. The New York Times editorial board wrote about the normalization of hate speech against Muslims in Congress. But none of it worked, because Bongino hadn't attacked Firdausi Islam. He'd attacked Omar's statements, her actions, her record. He'd used her own words. He'd cited public documents. He'd asked questions she couldn't answer. Even liberal commentators had to admit, usually quietly, usually off the record, that Omar had been destroyed. She walked into a buzzsaw. One MSNBC producer said to a reporter, "She thought she could do her usual routine, and Bongino just had everything." Omar's response was telling. She posted a Twitter thread at 11:47 p.m. the night of the debate. "Tonight was a coordinated Islamophobic attack designed to silence a black Muslim woman in Congress. These are the tactics of fascism: personal attacks, conspiracy theories, and hatred. But we will not be silenced. We will continue to fight for justice, for equality, for—" The thread went on for 23 tweets. But something had changed. The engagement was different. Instead of overwhelming support, she was getting ratioed, more critical replies than likes. Her own base was questioning her. "Why didn't you answer about the marriage?" one comment asked. "Why won't you release the records?" another demanded. Even supporters were saying things like, "You need better answers to these questions." The squad tried to defend her. AOC tweeted support. Rashida Tlaib called it a racist hit job. Ayanna Pressley wrote about attacks on women of color in Congress. Cori Bush invoked civil rights history. But their defenses felt weak, scripted, desperate, and they were all getting ratioed too. The political fallout was immediate and severe. Within a week, the House Ethics Committee announced it was opening an investigation into Omar's campaign finance practices, not because of the debate technically, but because the debate had put pressure on Democratic leadership to act. 3 different Democrats announced they were considering primary challenges in Minnesota's 5th District. One was a moderate who had been waiting for weakness. One was a progressive who thought Omar had lost her way. One was a Somali American who said, "She doesn't represent our community." Polling in her district showed her approval rating dropping 23 points in 2 weeks. Her disapproval among independents jumped to 67%. Even among Democrats in her district, she'd lost ground, down to 62% approval from 81%. Democratic leadership, which had always been uncomfortable with Omar and the squad, now openly distanced themselves. Nancy Pelosi, when asked about the debate, gave a terse, "Every member is responsible for their own statements." Hakeem Jeffries wouldn't comment at all. Omar lost her seat on the Foreign Affairs Committee. The official reason was reorganization, but everyone knew it was punishment for making the party look bad. Moderate Democrats had been looking for an excuse, and the debate had provided it. She stopped doing live television. No more CNN, no more MSNBC, even friendly outlets. Her communications team vetted every interview request with paranoid intensity. She retreated to her safe spaces, Instagram, TikTok, friendly podcasts where she wouldn't be challenged. Meanwhile, Dan Bongino became a conservative folk hero overnight. His podcast, already popular, shot to #1 on all platforms. His show Unfiltered on Fox News saw a 340% increase in ratings. His book, which had been published months earlier, shot back to the New York Times bestseller list. Conservative organizations across the country wanted him for events. Republican campaigns wanted him to campaign for them. Even moderate Democrats quietly reached out, asking if he'd be willing to have similar confrontations with far-left members of their own party. His approach became a template. Republican officials started adopting his style. Prepare thoroughly. Bring documentation. Cite specific facts. Don't get emotional. Let the evidence speak. And never back down when accused of racism or bigotry. If you're stating facts, bring receipts, became the rallying cry. Politicians started bringing folders to debates. Congressional hearings saw more documentation, more prepared questions, more specific citations. The era of vague accusations and emotional appeals was giving way to something more rigorous. The cultural impact went far beyond politics. Whose side are you on? Became a litmus test question. Journalists asked it of politicians. Voters asked it of candidates. It became shorthand for, do you love America or not? College campuses, where Omar had been something of a hero to progressive students, saw fierce debates. Student groups split over whether she represented their values or had betrayed them. The conversations got heated, with some defending her as a victim of racism, while others argued she'd simply been held accountable for her statements. Media outlets that had largely protected Omar were forced to cover the controversies they'd previously buried. The marriage allegations got mainstream coverage for the first time. Major newspapers assigned reporters to investigate her campaign finances. TV networks did segments on her controversial statements about Israel and terrorism. The phrase, "the oath you broke," entered the political lexicon. It became a way to describe politicians who seemed to serve interests other than America's. Did they keep their oath? Became a question voters asked. Saturday Night Live did a surprisingly even-handed sketch about the debate. Bongino portrayed as an intense but prepared investigator, Omar portrayed as dodging questions and crying Islamophobia. The sketch's punchline, maybe answer the questions. It wasn't pro-conservative exactly, but it wasn't the automatic defense of Omar that SNL usually gave progressives. 3 weeks after the debate, Ilhan Omar announced she would not seek re-election to any House leadership positions. She would remain in Congress, she said, but would focus on serving my constituents directly rather than seeking positions of party influence. In Washington speak, that translated to, I've been sidelined and I'm trying to save face. Her influence, once significant among progressives, waned rapidly. Her endorsements in other races became less valuable, sometimes even counterproductive, as opponents used her support to attack candidates. Her fundraising appeals brought in less money. Her media appearances became rarer. The debate had done what years of controversy hadn't. It had finally made her toxic, not to her base necessarily, but to the broader Democratic coalition. Moderate Democrats didn't want to be associated with her. Swing voters in purple districts saw her as a liability. And it had all happened because Dan Bongino had asked the simplest, most devastating question in American politics: whose side are you on? And Ilhan Omar couldn't answer. This wasn't about Democrat versus Republican. It wasn't about conservative versus liberal. It wasn't even about policy differences or ideological battles. This was about something more fundamental. Do you love America or not? Dan Bongino, who spent years protecting presidents, who ran toward danger while others ran away, who served his country in law enforcement and the Secret Service, asked that question. He asked it calmly. He asked it with evidence. He asked it with receipts. Ilhan Omar, who came to America as a refugee, who was given opportunities she'd never have elsewhere, who rose to Congress despite coming from nothing, couldn't answer it, or wouldn't. Because the answer, the real answer, might not be what Americans want to hear from someone in Congress. Omar represents something that should concern every American regardless of party. People who come to America, enjoy its benefits, exploit its freedoms, and then attack it from within. People who use victimhood as a shield against accountability. People who wrap anti-American sentiment in social justice language and call their critics racist. But Dan Bongino showed us something important. You can fight back. You can ask tough questions. You can demand answers. You can cite facts, present evidence, and refuse to back down when accused of bigotry or simply stating the truth. You don't have to accept the narrative. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to let accusations of racism or Islamophobia end legitimate questions about loyalty, gratitude, and basic honesty. The oath of office means something. Or it should. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Those aren't just words. They're a promise, a commitment, a sacred trust. When politicians break that oath, when they minimize terrorism, spread anti-Semitism, potentially commit fraud, use their office for personal enrichment, and attack America while enjoying its benefits, they should be held accountable. Not because of their religion, not because of their race, not because of their identity, because of their actions, their statements, their record, their oath. Dan Bongino brought the receipts, and the receipts told a story that every American needs to hear. If you think representatives should love America, share this story. Comment the oath. If you believe elected officials should honor their oath to defend this country. Because Dan Bongino asked the question that matters most. Whose side are you on? And Ilhan Omar's silence was the loudest answer of all.